Before beginning, I'd like to thank everyone who voted on my community tab poll, all 7 people, and to somewhat apologize if this video is not what you were expecting it to be. In part because this video was not exactly what I was expecting it to be, though I myself am not exactly sure what people are or were expecting with this video, given that I actually only included the idea arbitrarily so that my poll would have all 5 potential voting options, as that was the limit allowed and it was agitating my OCD not to have all 5 filled. In hindsight, 4 was plenty, and in future, if and when I do polls, I'll try not to let a blank space bother me so much. That isn't to say that I regret putting that option on that list. After all, I was going to make this video eventually anyway, and people apparently found the premise interesting, and when I sat down to write this video, I found that I actually had a lot more to say with each potential use of a single color than I thought I would when I put that option in the poll. When it did win, I was afraid this video would end up being just me elaborating on what had already been covered in my 6 colors for Persona 6 video, with some arbitrary additions like hair color to pad it out. But the more I explored and thought outside the box for some unique ways to make use of this color on a practical level or in a thematic sense, the more I realized I had underestimated both the potential for this list and the potential for the use of colors in Persona as a series. That said, because I find the premise of this video to be a bit obtuse from the title alone, before beginning, I'm going to take some time to quickly clarify what I mean and don't mean with regards to the hypothetical use of green in Persona 6. Color in Persona 3, 4, and 5 has been used in ways relevant with regards to those games' themes, and the associated symbolism of said game's color has been used to tie into the game's narrative in ways both major and subtle. For example, red is the color associated with anger and the chaos alignment. Joker's red gloves signify the blood on his hands that society projects due to a criminal record, and he is using those red hands to give freedom to those oppressed by individuals, institutions, and the toxic conformity of Japanese society. This is in contrast to the blue of Persona 3, a calming, even melancholic color used to represent law. While not as prominent when compared to B5, P3 does contain thematic lawful parallels. Sees as a force of security and protection, trying to stop the arrival of an upcoming old god, whose arrival is planned and supported by loosely associated outsiders who believe that Nick's avatar is to bring with it the conception as opposed to absolute destruction, invoking how the chaos alignment is often trying to upend the status quo and invoke widespread societal change. Meanwhile, yellow is the color associated with crime scenes as the color of police tape, confirmed by the developers to be why it was originally chosen, and is represented in the game as the duality of representing malaise and happiness, the characters becoming more happy and fulfilled by overcoming a toxic aspect of oneself that served to the detriment of themselves and those around them. Furthermore, the skulls in the mustard-colored fog represent the very real danger of the TV world, contrasting the vibrant yellow sun that shines on days when fun with friends is to be had. I hope that these examples and their context somewhat explain what I want to give speculative examples on for the use of a color core to the identity of a game, since in hindsight I'm not totally sure that I did it justice in my 6 colors video, even getting a comment that I was overthinking something that the developers have confirmed is an intentional part of Persona. With that now clarified, let us begin the video. The first and most obvious potential use for the color green in Persona 6 is the costumes. Persona 5 introduced the idea of the characters wearing elaborate, personalized costumes that themselves inform a bit about their perspective of what is a resistance against the status quo, invoking the aesthetics of kaito, punk, and eccentric to oppose a wider society that fetishizes conformity, security, and lawful order. One missed opportunity was really delving into the color red and how it could relate and unify the Phantom Thieves aesthetically, perhaps by having splashes of red to inform which part of their attire most relates to their idea of rebellion. I already talked about Joker's red gloves, which is the only real example of this. The closest besides is Panther's whole suit being red, but which itself does not actually convey a sense of rebellion, but instead a sense of the game fetishizing Panther's body. I'll give the benefit of the doubt and assume that this was meant to acknowledge that regardless of her will, her whole body would be seen in a sexual light, and that owning and being comfortable in it in spite of others' objectification was the goal, but when combined with her clear discomfort at wearing it and the context of awakening it when held captive by a sexual predator who fantasizes that the school he works at is his own little St. James Island, her awakening fumbles the most, thematically resembling a conformance to the oppressor's view of her, as opposed to her view of rebellion against him. This is in direct contrast to Noir, whose outfit is distinctly masculine while also emphasizing and embracing her femininity in complement to her circumstances and desires, showing her regaining autonomy over herself and her body in defiance to the oppressive men in her life. Her body is for her to be comfortable in, not an asset for her father to sell or her fiancé to have his way with at his leisure. And unlike with Queen Panther and Now Till Before Them, the game never objectifies her body, intruding on her ownership of. Taking a step back from the personalized rebellion aspect of the costumes in P5 to how green would work with the costumes in P6, due to green being associated with the neutral alignment in much the same way that red is for the chaos alignment, the costumes, and especially the green of them, can be used to infer the character's perspectives of personalized balance and what part of their outfit they see as an outward expression of internal harmony, which is something incredibly complementary to green as the color easiest on our eyes. The second potential use for green is for it to be used to represent or identify a Jungian concept as manifested physically through cognition. Shadow selves, for example, frequently manifest as such and are often easily identified by having ominous, glowing eyes. Traditionally yellow in P4 to represent that game's thematic use of yellow to represent hazardous traits and the shared arcs of accepting and overcoming those toxic aspects, leading to greater happiness rather than suffering beneath one's shadow. This has been carried over into P4's many spin-offs and P5, but in P2, however, shadow cells had glowing red eyes instead, opening up the possibility of eye color for shadow cells to be fluid in future installments, perhaps influenced by what factors caused them to manifest and where. Barring that and keeping yellow for shadow selves, however, glowing green eyes could still be used to represent different Jungian concepts independent from shadow selves, such as the returning ideal self, or another concept yet to be tackled in this series, such as the inner child anima and or animus. The third potential use of the color green is in technology. While I've connected green to nature previously, as the common color for motherboards, green is also associated with technology, and frequently environmentally friendly, or at least less damaging alternatives, are known by the adjective green to signify them as better for the environment. Solar panels, for instance, are a source of green energy, and are often themselves the color green as well. However, green technology does not only refer to things like solar panels and electric cars, but also technological innovations that we may not often associate with or think of as eco-friendly alternatives due to not being immediately or obviously associated with things like conservationism and carbon footprints. Lighting, for instance, only accounts for 5% of the world's carbon footprint, but that doesn't stop LED lights from being an example of green technology due to being more energy efficient and also having less of a toll on the environment to make. And that is to say nothing of the revolutions being done in the field and the potential with the use of ultraviolet LEDs to kill all pathogens beneath the purple glow within seconds. Technology, very broadly speaking, is an important component of society and thus culture, especially with the youth, those growing up accustomed to having access to more advanced technology and better knowledge in using it when compared to the previous generation on average, due to the fact that it is often so intrinsic to their private lives, work, and education. Because of this, as a series that often takes heavy influence from Japanese youth culture, Persona has often incorporated technologies and how they impact Japanese society into their stories. The best example of this, because of how it is used both thematically and accurate to reality, is the use of TVs to represent widespread misconceptions in P4. Similar potential also existed within P5, yet was not followed through on, as an invasive app, downloaded without consent and unable to be deleted by the user, was necessary in order to access the metaverse. The potential to comment on how many real-life apps to come pre-downloaded on phones, despite being linked to numerous counts of data and security breaches, as well as the stalking and controlling of the personal lives of employees by their employers, and how these privacy violations that detract from one's freedom, the uphill battle in getting them to be taken seriously, and the difficulty in being tech-savvy enough to use alternatives was ripe. painfully close to being touched upon with the introduction of the hacker Futaba, who was able to intrude on others' privacy and blackmail the phantom thieves using this information, as well as the prevalence of an AI assistant in P5S. Because of this context, I believe that the best way to implement green with technology would be within the following outline for a social link. Someone needing to get and use a piece of green technology that they find to be more difficult and obtuse to operate than they had been expecting, which throws their life out of balance, and they need to reclaim it by adjusting and figuring everything out, reducing their carbon footprint, and living a healthier life once achieved. A story that could also be the commentary on technology that I found painfully close to being addressed in P5, of how one must find a balance in using and distancing oneself from technology at times. Finding the time to get up from the computer and touch grass, as my mother used to say. In this hypothetical, the technology is the thematic component, and simply coloring it green will tie into the themes of balance and harmony organically with the surrounding game. The fourth potential use for green is to represent the deities within the game. In Scottish mythology, the colour green is used to represent the Doinashi, the old gods from before the time of Christianity, and those that are in some way related to these beings, such as the Kushi, fairy dogs who are often tasked with hunting for the Fae folk, sometimes alone, and other times as part of a grand hunting party known as the Wild Hunt, both of which have been demons in SMT. Green could even be the dominant color for the main antagonist, a god of human cognition who is perhaps even one of the Doinashi proper, to better cement this connection. As for what this god would represent to tie into Green's thematic potential, I'd say a false balance. Neutrality is an alignment sorely in need of a more nuanced take and examination than what has been offered. In SMT4 Apocalypse, for example, neutrality is unironically and uncritically fetishized by the narrative due to the negatives of law and chaos's extremes, resulting in neutrality itself being the purest definition of an extreme, an uncritical glorification of it as a net positive, while conveniently ignoring the flaws that one can have with this perspective and the hurdles to achieve it. In fact, despite being referred to as a middle ground multiple times, only one instance, how Nozomi runs the fairy forest, is any commentary on finding a balance between the two competing but not mutually exclusive values of chaos and law to find a compromise that broadly works. This is how neutrality is often sold as an ideology which has remained static and uniform since SMT1. This is in stark contrast to chaos, wherein the associated concept of freedom is explored beautifully and in distinct ways from multiple societal and spiritual perspectives across SMT2 and 3, as well as from a more Jungian perspective in Persona 5. Chaos is an alignment not fetishized, but rather scrutinized. The principle of freedom is examined as a net positive, with the potential for a large price to be paid to achieve it. And though not as thoroughly, widely, or with as much nuance, the same is true of law. Security and order are examined and advocated for as net positives, but with the potential to give rise to theocratic dictatorships and oppressive hierarchies as reasons to be cautious and ask if they are the right prices to be paid for the benefits. Neutrality, by contrast, is often an imprecise and inconsistent third option, typically heralded as an enlightened centrist-esque middle ground, or shown in the narrative as a staunch, uncritical rejection of chaos and law, even when the same game is advocating for neutrality from the perspective of the former. While an issue in and of itself with most games, this actually opens up an interesting possibility to explore neutrality from this perspective, by having the deity advocate for this extremely vapid interpretation of neutrality, to contrast the main protagonists, who find balance not through fetishizing the concept, but through self-actualization and self-discovery, adjusting as they discover new parts of themselves, and finding ways to accommodate their own needs as life continues and things change. This principle of finding a real, genuine balance is also a big part of life management, the simulation of which is core to the gameplay loop of Persona, and thus an organic way to explore the concept of balance and how it is actually achieved versus how it is often poorly implemented. For most of this video, I've discussed the uses of green as it represents to what is probable given the context of the Persona series, the neutral alignment, Japanese youth culture, and in the case of costumes, the unique particulars that help make Persona unique from contemporary JRPGs and other spin-offs of SMT. But for the fifth potential use, I'd like to deviate a bit and examine a more radical possibility. A more allegorical use of green that doesn't have a precedent to be used in the broader SMT series, but is still highly compatible with Persona specifically. Alchemy is an esoteric concept that is often lacking in representation within SMT, despite its aesthetic having been adopted by many psychologists, including Carl Jung, as allegories for psychological concepts and journeys in self-improvement. Thus, as a series about psychology, the implementation of alchemical concepts and symbols can easily be implemented into the narrative, and could even potentially be used in place of the Fool's Journey, a Jungian trope that Persona has often struggled to organically weave into the narrative outside of P3, but that is a video for another time. Meanwhile, for the purposes of this list, the alchemical concept most fitting as one of the few with actual precedence to be a demon in the Devil Children series, and being the color green, is the Green Lion of metallurgic alchemy, or less ambiguously, the lion swallowing the sun, and more commonly known simply as the Green Lion, and or the Sun Lion in its demon appearance. This lion's rather unique color is believed by scholars to relate to one of two potential interpretations for alchemists to the code, which themselves aren't mutually exclusive, as alchemical symbols could often have multiple meanings. The first is plant life. Green represents the natural world, as it is the most common color one would associate with grass, stems, leaves, and other types of foliage. This theory posits then that the green lion eating the sun is therefore photosynthesis, the act of plants gaining power and nutrients from sunlight, akin to how a lion would eat prey to gain the equivalent. The second potential interpretation, meanwhile, is that the green is the element vitriol, an element used in alchemical treatments to purify metals of their impurities in an attempt to refine them. The theory goes then that the lion is the treatment to transmute a base metal into a noble metal, most probably gold. While one might argue that this is more of a thematic use for this alchemical symbol over the color, one not always present in illustrations of, and which has been miscolored in SMT previously, I'd counter that as green, be it representing plant life or vitriol, is core to this symbolism, and that therefore the usage of the green lion is a thematic use of the color green. And the final potential use for green is in the setting. On my aforementioned 6 colors video, I got a comment which argued that green was unlikely, as it was the color of the Dark Hour in Persona 3, and I firmly disagree with this line of thinking, even if I can trace that it's probably coming from the fact that both the TV world and Metaverse had tinges of yellow and red, which tied into the themes of Persona 4 and 5 respectively. However, I'd argue that this is exactly the reason why green can not only work for the setting, but even be used in a broader way than red or yellow have been able to provide. The green in P3 was used to create surrealism and an uneasy atmosphere, a calming but at the same time disquieting nature to the Dark Hour as it came about, as green is both very relaxing but also very unnatural and thus very attention-grabbing in that context. With this as the precedent, it opens up the possibility for green to once again be used in a similar way, if not in the sky proper, then as tinges upon the stone and earth of dungeons like mementos, which could invoke a feeling of the area being contaminated by a hazardous substance, subverting the usage of green in its association with balance and the natural world extremely effectively, and opening up its usage to also be tied into greed and sickness. However, at the same time, this does not disqualify green from being used in a more calming manner when appropriate. Both uses are the potential, and both are what I'd like to see, which is not unreasonable, given Persona's strong art direction and the franchise's history with eerie atmospheres in the Golden Age, and which the recent games have been in need of. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'm also very happy to have this video done and uploaded. In my last video, my thoughts on the top 10 games that Atlus is looking to remake, I mentioned in the outro that this video would be out for the 17th, and I'm very happy that I managed to keep this deadline because a lot of things went wrong that almost caused me to delay it. As you may have guessed from my voice, the day after I uploaded that video I came down with a cold, which made mustering the energy to get things done harder to draw upon,
And as if that wasn't bad enough, my script actually got lost due to a power outage, and I had to redo a lot of it on very short notice, and later redo some of the editing after my software froze on me. Most of it turned out fine, but in order to get it done, I had to truncate some of my points slightly, leaving out a few things that I feel would have benefited my points, like my comparisons to the green lion to the hair of Inaba, and how it could work allegorically, much like the hair did in Persona 4, where Taro Namatame represented the hare, which is also the mascot for his delivery truck, as well as some examples on how The Legend of Zelda incorporated green into the settings for Breath of the Wild and The Wind Waker as further examples for green's potential in the setting. Regardless, the video is now done and I can move on to what I want to do next. Originally, I had wanted to do at least one more video for February, but given that I am sick, that is now open to change, and so a lot will depend on how well I feel over the next few days. If you want to see what I'm capable of when healthy, then perhaps I can interest you in my video on Persona 3 Portable Velvet Blue, since I'm really happy with how it turned out. If not, then perhaps some other video on screen now will interest you. Until next time, I am Balao-kun.